Hi, Arian. Welcome to Content Kettle. Thank you for taking out the time today.
Of course. Hey, Vani. Thanks so much for having me on.
For our listeners, Arian is actually the founder of IgnitePOST, a fantastic solution that helps you write a lot of handwritten notes, personalized handwritten notes, but at scale using technology. And obviously, I'm not doing justice to how I'm explaining IgnitePOST, so I'm going to let Arian tell us about it.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to jump in there. So basically what IgnitePOST is we help brands create magic moments using handwritten notes, like you mentioned. And our solution is actually part hardware, part software. So on the hardware side, we actually have robots that will hold real big ballpoint pens and write out handwritten notes in actual handwriting styles. And then on the software side, we have software that will integrate into either CRM systems or marketing automation platforms or e-commerce platforms to allow brands to really create these really special moments. So kind of trigger these really personalized, real handwritten notes exactly when they really need them. So we're kind of part hardware, part software, but ease of use of a typical marketing automation platform. But we use robotics to give that kind of personal warmth to each note that's written. And then we do all the fulfillment and sending and everything for you. So that's the very quick overview of what IgnitePOST is.
So I'm going to further ask a follow-up question. I know it's going to sound silly because you've mentioned hardware, you've also mentioned software, right? So for a lot of people,
Totally.
software might associate handwritten notes to digital notes. So are these digital notes or are these something that we can actually, hold?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, good question. So these are actual real physical notes that arrive in the mail on your doorstep or on your customer's doorstep or on your prospect's doorstep. So yes, that's a good point, good differentiation point there. So there's a couple things that I'll mention that. So number one, yes, they are physical notes that actually arrive that you can, physically hold and touch. So not digital. And then beyond that, actually, we don't consider ourselves direct mail because the product is so different than direct mail. So additionally, people think of direct mail as this kind of mass marketing mail that everybody is used to seeing, right? And the oft quoted stat is about 20% of that mass direct mail ends up going in the trash without people even looking at it or reading it. So it's kind of, most people open their mail over the trash bin and it's just a race to like, how fast can I throw this away? So because the product is so different, what we do is an actual pen to paper with real ink in a handwriting style. So when it arrives, it doesn't look like, okay, this is something that's just mass junk that I need to throw out. So that's kind of another differentiating point too that I always like to mention because people kind of have the concept of direct mail as being this printed, mass printed type of experience. And there certainly are that type of mail that goes out that's printed that the font looks like it is handwritten, but in reality it came out of a printer. And so the difference between the two products is pretty vast when it comes to the experience that you're actually giving to the customer and the end results too.
But like you mentioned, there's direct mail, and then there are so many digital channels where, when we talk about, how we want the customer to really communicate with us. So there's social media, there's email, there's SMS,
Yep.
there's WhatsApp Messenger, and I don't know what not. Why do you think that handwritten notes are particularly making a comeback?
Yeah. So all of those examples are awesome examples, right? And I always like to say we live in a day and age where nothing operates in a vacuum, right? So these are all tools in your tool belt. So, you know, everything that we have done with IgnitePOST is actually designed to really complement those other channels that you just spoke about, right? So at no point do I ever say, hey, listen, stop sending emails, stop sending SMS. You should only use our product and only send mail and handwritten mail. That's kind of not what I'm saying. So everything is designed to really work together. But if we take a look at the landscape, there's a couple of things happening, right? So the digital landscape is getting very, very what I would call saturated, right? We live in a time where, on average, people get about 200 emails into their inbox every single day. They're subject to about 5,000 digital ads throughout the day that come to them on every device they own, your phone, your tablet, your computer. We're now getting push notifications and SMS, pushed to us at all hours of the day on all different devices as well. So, the landscape is basically people are really saturated with a lot of digital communication. And so the most effective thing that we've actually seen is just kind of breaking through and cutting through that, what I call digital noise. So it's not that we say stop doing all those things. It's finding a more effective channel to really get your customer to focus on what you've sent them. When somebody typically gets mail, it's really an experience that you're giving them, right? So typically, if you send them something like one of our handwritten cards, they'll go out, they'll retrieve it physically, actually hold it, and experience it, and have an experience with it. But people spend time going through their mail. They go the off-quoted stat from the USPS is they spend anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes a day, depending on how much mail they get, going through the mail, interacting with it, figuring out what do I need to do with this. And that's huge, right? If you think about it, how long is the average time that someone is on a website, right? If you could get somebody to focus on your website for 30 minutes at a time, that's like mind-boggling. So it's not this that I'm saying IgnitePOST and our handwritten notes should be used in lieu of everything. It's really to complement those things, and to work alongside it. And the biggest reason that I always tell brands to at least try this out is because of this kind of digital saturation that's happening. So that's kind of one part. But then the other side of that coin that we always talk about is we are living in what we like to call the relationship centric era, where it's becoming more and more important as a brand to actually develop a real relationship with your customers, so that when they vote with their dollars and figure out where do I want to spend my money, they come to you instead of a competitor. Because for the most part, a lot of products and services out there, there are multiple choices that someone might have for almost any product or service out there. So the way that brands can really build a big brand is by establishing that relationship with their customer or with their prospect, so that the prospect wants to actually spend their money with that brand. And so this is a contrast to maybe 10 15 years ago, where I would say maybe we're in something kind of like the product centric era, where it was all about what bells and whistles and how many features can I cram into my product to really harp on and kind of advertise and push those. And it's really going kind of the opposite way now, where people really want to know, okay, what is this brand about? And they want to purchase something from a brand that they feel connected to, loyal to. And so that's the other piece that we help brands do, is really establish, cut through the noise and then establish that relationship, but do it at scale.
That's fantastic. But when you said that, it's a lot about experiences that make people want to spend more money. Now, coming to the money aspect of it, sending handwritten notes at scale, is it like a costly affair? Because whenever it comes to using any of the channels, we're already spending. You said we have to use each channel in tandem. So we're going to be using social, we're going to be using email. So those costs are already there. And then on top of that, we add handwritten notes as well. So what's the typical ROI that you see? What's the typical spend that you see? What can brands expect here?
Yeah, good question. So it all comes down to where brands derive the most value, right? So that's kind of where we always like to kind of pop in and insert ourselves. So we typically create experiences around the points that will drive the most value for brands. And so some examples that we typically see with brands that we work with are typically post-purchase flows. So folks, will come in, and the overarching thing is, in order to build a big brand, your goal is to turn first-time customers into repeat buyers, and then repeat buyers into raving fans that come back again and again and again, right? Like that's kind of I'm kind of simplifying it, but that's kind of the flow that people want. So what we do is we work with brands to figure out where are those most valuable points, and that's kind of where our product is designed to be inserted and be most effective. So when somebody makes a purchase, the whole idea is, how do we get them back to make a second purchase or a third purchase, right? Like, what's the most valuable thing that we can do? So that's a very, very common use case that we see. In the e-commerce world, everything lives and dies based on the number of fresh positive reviews that you can generate. And so that's valuable for a brand on a number of reasons, right? So if somebody comes and makes a purchase for the second or third time and hasn't left a review, you now know, okay, I have someone that really likes my product, but hasn't done something of value for us, which is telling the world about it and leaving a review. So here's a great use case for reaching out specifically at that time, giving them this really personalized experience and saying, hey, Vani, you just made your second purchase with us. Thank you so much. it would mean the world if you left us a review. Here's a quick link to follow to do that. So it's really about aligning and figuring out where that value is so that you get the ROI that you expected. And then the last case that I'll also kind of just give you an idea, right? A lot of brands, they offer subscriptions. So, you know, the whole idea is not just to get somebody to make a first-time purchase or second-time purchase, but it's to get them to actually sign up for a membership or join a subscription. And so that's another great use case as well, right? Brands want to keep folks in subscriptions as long as possible. So that's another great use that we see is, all right, if I typically know someone will sign up and be in my subscription for 6 months, and then that's kind of the average churn point. Very commonly, we see people set up an automation with IgnitePOST that at month 5, they get a really personalized note from the founder, thanking them for being part of, you know, their membership community and saying, listen, here's 10% off for your next 3 months, right? Or something that will get them over the point that they would typically churn. So, you know, to answer your question, it's all about aligning the product and the handwritten note with the point that would derive the most value for the brand.
I think you're right about one fact is that I personally prefer to stick to brands that have made me feel special in one way or another. So sometimes it's just about that little handwritten note or that personalized email, even if it's entirely text and not even framed well when it comes to,
Right.
let's say, language or grammar. It's just about that note that gets sent across. So that's definitely there. You mentioned very briefly that for instance, with subscriptions, you said that, you know, at the point of churn, you can probably send them a 10% off and then say maybe resubscribe on our site. How are you connecting a handwritten note to online experiences? I mean, does the person really have to, you know, kind of paste the link, write down the link themselves? What's like, how do they transition from something which is offline to online?
Yeah, awesome question. So there's a number of different ways. And again, this comes down to really working with the brand and figuring out what makes the most sense and kind of what fits in with the brand themselves. But the most common things that we see, because remember, what we normally do, our experience is really sending a 5x7 handwritten card in an envelope. So again, looks completely different than just mass direct mail. So you get this really personalized experience that arrives in an envelope. Brands they can customize the front of the card. So the front of the 5x7 card with any design they want. So there's an opportunity there. And then you can also customize the actual handwritten message on the inside of the card. So to your point, how do we connect the two? How do we get them, you know, to connect the digital and the online and the offline experience? So I always start with the front of the card, right? So that is something that brands can have full reign and design whatever they want. So the most common things we see there are doing things like having a promotional code or some type of code right on the front of the card that says, and then referring to that on the interior of the card of saying, hey, Vani, like I'm Arian from IgnitePOST. I left you a code on the front of the card here. Use it for 10% off for your next 3 months, you know, something like that. So that kind of combo works really well. And then that gets them back to the site and you can then track it, becomes trackable by how many people actually use that code. So that's one example. Obviously, QR codes now are super popular. So that's another thing that we see a lot is, again, using it in that design and kind of the context of designing whatever you want for the front of the card, but then having a QR code for somebody to scan and having, you know, like an arrow pointing to it saying, hey, I left you something here. Make sure you take advantage of it. Something like that works really well. And then having the personalized note inside that really reinforces, hey, I really left you something that I think you should take advantage of. You should take advantage of it, is a combo that works really well. So those are a couple ways. Obviously, so since these are handwritten notes, we actually have seen really good response rates by honestly just having a phone number there for somebody to text or call, which works really well if you want to pull people back into like an SMS list, or if they have opted out at some point and you want to get them back in the fold. That's a great way, because when you actually send someone a handwritten note and say, hey, here's the number, can you send me a quick text? People actually do it because it's a lot more personal and they feel like you're asking them personally to do something. So that works really well. And then obviously, you know, you can put links either on the front of the card or in the actual handwritten message. In the message, it looks a little bit less authentic. So I try to steer brands away from that. But it has happened before, and brands do that. So there's a number of different ways to kind of go back and forth and connect the kind of offline and online experiences.
Personally, love the QR and the SMS example that you just gave, because we tend to see like people really opt out of these lists very rapidly once they get into the promotions side of things. So
Right.
definitely an interesting way to get those opt-ins back. My next question to you is going to be something which I'm sure you must have noticed. It's like one brand does something and then the other brands follow, right? So it's just about setting that mark right there. So for instance, why are emails choked? Why is SMS choked right now? Why are people unsubscribing from WhatsApp lists? It used to be so
Yeah.
personal, and now it's like, I don't want it anymore. Uh, do you think that we'll reach a point where just like those flyers, like how you said, we just look at them and we dump them, right? It's probably a fraction of a second when we decide, no, this is of no value to me. At what point do you think that, brands need to draw a line when it comes to sending handwritten notes? Because obviously there are brands that come with massive marketing budgets as well, right? So for
Yeah.
them to send out handwritten notes at scale may sound like a brilliant idea, but for a customer, it might just lose that essence of personalization, I think. What's your experience with that?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is, judging just by the sheer amount of mass marketing and mass mail that I get, I think we have a lot of room before the same thing happens on the handwritten note side. And just by the sheer volume of just the regular direct mail and kind of junk mail that I get, obviously it's working. Otherwise, companies wouldn't continue to do it, despite kind of like in spite of the fact that most people just toss it immediately and throw it away. So, on what we do is kind of using more of a targeted approach, kind of like I mentioned earlier, and really kind of figuring out where can we inject the most value and kind of where are the experiences that we can give people these really great experiences and kind of trigger them on an as needed on demand basis. So I think we have a lot of leeway and a lot of room to get to before people are like inundated and saturated with like too many handwritten notes. Just judging by the regular mass direct mail market. So I think there's a lot of room that we have and that we can get to before something like that happens. The other thing too is that there's a lot of different ways to differentiate yourself as a brand using our product, right? There's a lot of different things you can do to make everything feel different. So, yes, we send 5x7 cards and envelopes, but brands have full reign to design whatever they want for the front of the card. We also have a lot of brands that want to use their own types of stationery and kind of work with their own kind of stationery providers. So even though we still do the same thing and set up the same automations and same triggers and things like that, the actual experience on the customer side is different, and you can really kind of inject your own brand personality to those experiences. So that kind of is a further kind of tool in your tool belt that you can use, that even though other folks might be doing the same thing, it feels different because of the experience that you've put together and that you've crafted for the customers that you're reaching out to. So to answer your question, I think there's a long way to go before we get to that point where people are crying uncle because they're getting too many handwritten cards.
Makes sense. So, to just like recap, or let's say summarize what you just said and what you've been explaining before, the importance of segmentation, identifying, who you need to really send these handwritten notes to, what you have to say. If you had to give 5 tips to somebody who is going to send out their first handwritten note, what would it be? What would they be?
Yeah, well, I think I would start with really what you just mentioned there. And actually, when we work with brands, the not hardest, but the longest period of getting started with us is figuring out like what they want to say and when they want to say these things. Once they have kind of the experience that they want to give somebody ironed out, getting set up and starting with IgnitePOST takes maybe 5 minutes at most. So the hard part is doing the work up front. So to your point, I would start by number one, figuring out what are these experiences that we like, what are these magic moments, what are these magic experiences that we really want to craft for people. So that's kind of number one. Once you have that figured out, like you mentioned as well, the second thing is figuring out how to segment and target that portion of the population, whether it's something that you're going to do through an automation and setup, or some sort of kind of segment that you build in a tool like Klaviyo or something similar, or is it something that you want to just kind of upload a list through the IgnitePOST dashboard. So figuring out kind of that experience. And then the last couple things I always say when I work with a brand, the most important thing to do in the actual card is follow what I like to call the 3 C's. So 1 is cut through the noise, 2 is connect with your recipient, and then 3 is have a clear call to action. So that's kind of my formula for what to do in a card and what to say in one of our handwritten notes. And then brands can take that and adapt that and really make it their own. So the cut through the noise part is generally easy if you're going to be sending them a handwritten note. As long as you've segmented correctly and have the timing down, you're generally going to get an impression. You know, we like to say we have a 99% open rate because nobody gets a handwritten note in the mail and just tosses it. They're at least going to put some eyeballs on it. So you've got that part down. Connecting with the recipient, you know, we have a lot of brands that will basically take sales copy or like marketing copy and just slap it in a card and be like, hey, we're done. And what we try to do is really work with them and say, listen, like you'll get the best results if you really take the time to personalize and connect with the recipient and make it seem like it's not just a generic template that you just copied and pasted. So mentioning something about maybe the last purchase that the customer made or the last experience or touch point that they may have had with your brand, something in there that tells the customer, okay, this is not just a quick copy and paste job. They put a little bit of thought into it. There's a little bit more depth here. So something to connect with the recipient. And then the most common thing that I always like to say is make sure you have a clear call to action. So what do you actually want the customer to do? You don't need it. We definitely have some brands that they just want the touch point. And the whole idea is we want to create this magic moment that's just very memorable for this customer so that they remember us and the next time they make a purchase, they come back to us, which is totally fine. And then we also work with brands that actually have specific things they want folks to do. Like the example we spoke about earlier, hey, here's 10% off for your next couple months of your subscription. Use the code on the front before it expires in 30 days, right? Something very clear of what you want them to do. Or, hey, scan the QR code on the front of this card. I left you something. I want you to check it out. But very, very clear call to action. So those are kind of my handful of tips of what I like to say and what we've seen honestly be successful for other brands. And so we kind of put that formula together, put that kind of methodology together, and that's what we recommend brands follow.
That's fantastic. So coming to a close, what is that one tip you would leave for our listeners who are right now, since of course, we talk a lot about marketing on this podcast. So increased customer acquisition costs, decreased customer retention, struggling with loyalty. So what's that one thought you'd like to leave them with or one takeaway that you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, so just a general takeaway is almost every brand that I talk to, they spend a lot of time thinking about acquisition, almost to the detriment of retention and referral and kind of everything that comes on the kind of bottom end of the funnel, the back end of the funnel there. But if we actually look, the brands that are able to really achieve breakout growth and become really big brands, they've nailed the retention engine, right? And so a lot of brands really focus a lot on the acquisition piece and not enough on actually keeping the existing customers that they have and growing those customers into larger customers. And that's really where we excel at IgnitePOST. And so, that's really the key to building a big brand is keeping the customers that you have and growing them into bigger customers. And this kind of all ties back into what we were talking about earlier with, the relationship-centric era. It's all about how do you develop that relationship with the customer so that they do stick with your brand and continue to come back time and time again. So I guess that would be my one suggestion and kind of one tip is, don't focus on acquisition to the detriment of retention and really figure out and nail the retention game, which is something that IgnitePOST works with a lot of brands to kind of help do and help craft those experiences that do keep people around and coming back again and again and again.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Arian, because this was super insightful. Handwritten notes as a marketing tactic hasn't been brought up yet. It's been used by small businesses so far. So, you see those handwritten notes every now and then, but then it's usually not at scale. We don't see the bigger brands really making that effort anymore. So this puts things into perspective. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. I had a blast.